All right. Welcome to another episode of Yokefellows, our second episode, where iron sharpens iron. And one of the things that we forgot in our first podcast, out of excitement, was introducing ourselves. So I'm Brendan South. I'm attending Heritage Christian Church.
And I'm now this week I'm not too excited to introduce myself. I'm Nick Tanner, the associate pastor at Heritage Christian Church. Yep.
Okay. So I just wanted to kind of recap on last Sunday at Heritage. Any testimony or anything you want to share about last Sunday? Anything?
It was just reassuring, to know that sometimes I think that we get into life and we feel like we're in this battle alone. But Yokefellows really means coming alongside and being with and doing things together. So it was just super encouraging, and I felt like my iron was sharpened as well from last week.
All right, well, that's great. And I feel the same way about the podcast. Really encouraging to have that fellowship and sharpen one another, and look forward to doing this ministry. And then the following day, Sunday. The pastor touched on this that helped, like the lesson that he talked about, and the reality of going the way of the enemy can bless us earthly, but not eternally. And he gave that, stark reality of like that you will be blessed earthly if you go the way of the world, but it will not bless you eternally. And so, just like with leadership, the goal is to teach leadership that leads to eternal rewards and not what leads to selfish temporary gain. It's not a promise that you're going to get financial gain. You're not going to it's not a promise to become the CEO or have the most successful business. This is about leadership of leading others to Christ and with those that you have influence over. So the main topic of this is leadership requires losses. So first top part I want to talk about is what does leadership mean and what it doesn't mean. And one definition is that by a leadership guru, John Maxwell and others, they define it as having influence over others. And I know that you had other more details on the definition of leadership.
Right, absolutely. So you brought up John Maxwell. One of my favorite John Maxwell quotes is, "If you think you're leading, but nobody's following you, you're just taking a walk." I absolutely love that because that's so right. I come across people that think, "Oh yeah, I'm a leader." Well, who are you influencing, right? Who's following you up on this kind of thing? So, but absolutely, yeah, John Maxwell has a great definition of leadership, like you said. And the more that you try to define it and pinpoint and figure out exactly what it is, the analogy I've heard is it's like trying to nail Jello to a tree, that it can just be kind of difficult to come up with the perfect definition. We want to come up with the perfect thing and put it in this box, and this is exactly how it's supposed to be. But for every leadership guru that there is, they've got their own definition of it. I have 10 different definitions of leadership right in front of me, including Eisenhower, his definition of it. My favorite leadership definition is by Orrin Woodward and Chris Brady. And it says, leadership is the influence of others in a productive, vision-driven direction, and is done through the example, conviction, and character of a leader. And because that kind of embodies everything, although we know leadership when we see it, we just can't always define it.
Yeah. And to give some examples of what we might see as leadership, one of the examples of leadership is position. What position you have inside an organization or inside a ministry or with someone you have a relationship with. And some of those positions might include pastors, board members, elders, parents, grandparents, managers, CEOs, the spouse. And so there's some examples of just positional leadership.
Absolutely, yeah. And so many people think they've got to have the position or the title, but that just kind of follows after the true leadership has begun. I worked with someone a long time ago. My boss's name was Bethany, and she told me one day, she says, "You're a silent leader." I think, what does that mean? I didn't have the position, but she said that people were looking to me for responses and reactions and what we should be doing. And I'd never really thought of it like that. I thought, well, you have the position. And she wasn't threatened or anything like that. I think she was kind of happy about the whole thing. But yeah, there are so many examples. Anytime that we talk about just influence, that's exactly what leadership is. It's influencing people in different ways. My wife, Caitlin, had talked about the child and parent relationship of leadership, that the parent should be leading the child in the direction that they want.
And so we have positional, and you touched on this too. Examples of relational leadership, and the examples of that type includes mentors, Yokefellows, title of the podcast, co-laborers, people who have wisdom and conduct themselves in a way, knowing if you follow them, they want the outcome God has for us. So, having that wisdom, conducting themselves in a way that they know, like, hey, these people are following me. Hey, if you have children, your children looking up to you. Your children looking up to you. The church members, those who know you're your pastor, they're looking up to you, and you have wisdom that you can pass on, and an awareness to conduct yourself in a way that honors God and leads them to Christ. And I had a note here on this as well, is that, to be an example of Jesus that leads people to Jesus is who we should all follow. It's not about that we're leading people just to follow us. It's to point them to Christ, because we're all just followers of Christ. And I think that's an important part in leadership, is that, it's not all about us, but that we're following somebody greater than our authority.
Amen to that. That's exactly right. And, you look at the world as a whole in leadership, and everybody's influencing everybody in different ways. It's a matter of whether it's in a positive or a negative way, I suppose. Peer pressure could be influence in a positive or a negative way. And, I wonder who God has put in our lives to influence our path, to lead us back to Him, or possibly to, I hate to say, to allow us to kind of get in the weeds a little bit and to kind of realize how much we need Him, and to follow somebody back onto the right path that we're supposed to be on there.
And you talked about that you just touched on that of what leadership isn't, and I also noted that it's not about the position alone, and it's not exclusive to business roles. So I want to emphasize on that. Like, when you hear leadership, this isn't like business talk. Like, this is life too. Mm-hmm. And it's not someone who is looking to elevate themselves at the cost of others. Not that you're stepping on other people just so that you can get, whether it's recognition or maybe it's just you want your voice heard. That can be there as well. And so we also have to check in on our intentions when we're leading. So that's going into our topic today, that leadership requires losses. Sometimes it's things that we cause, or sometimes we have to take the loss. Losing temporary positions for the bigger picture. Sometimes that's what's required. And an example I have is I had an employee who had done a task before and kind of messed up on the task, but they got it to a part where they, were able to accomplish it. And when it came up again, they said, hey, I'm not doing this again because I don't want to be in this mess again. And so, my hill to die on was, hey, you've done this before, you can do this. And then another person says, hey, I'll do it. The person trying to be the peacemaker. And, in that moment, when you're leading people, you have to be aware to say, hey, this isn't about, dying on this one hill. Dying on a hill doesn't always have the outcome that we intend. And when I realized that, I was like, okay, I have to get in the trenches with them. Whether I lose this argument or I win this argument, it's for the betterment of everyone else, and it's not about me being right.
That's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. As you're talking about that, the hill to die on, I am reminded of Gettysburg and Pickett's charge and Brigadier General Chamberlain, that kind of the beginning of the battle. He was able to fight off the Confederate troops, but he had to. But it was a battle, and he had to decide. Okay, is this worth having this spot? And then after that, they put him right in the middle. They figure he'll be safe, and then that's where Pickett's charge hits. God, he orchestrated and allowed some of these things to happen in order to have some of these losses, but to have the greater, the greater purpose in mind and in sight. There's this saying that you sometimes have to take one step backwards to take two steps forward, and that's certainly the case. That you're talking about losses, and I think that a sacrifice comes right into this too. Sacrifice is what truly makes something sacred, and God works through this in all kinds of different ways. I'm also reminded, we're on this topic, of another John Maxwell story where he talks about having the people in the right seats on the bus. If the bus is the organization, be it a business, be it a nonprofit movement or organization of all volunteers, whatever that may be, getting people in the right places on the bus. And sometimes that can hurt us a little bit if somebody's in the wrong place. But you get somebody in the driver's seat and put them over in a different spot, and get someone that's gifted to do different things. And once you get them on that alignment, it's going to take some losses and it's going to take some sacrifice to figure out exactly where we're supposed to be. But once we do, that bus is going to go smooth, and you can follow that vision that you're influencing people towards.
So I gave an example. I don't know if you have any examples. Do you have any examples of a time where you didn't want to lose and realized or didn't realize maybe the loss may have brought a greater win? And just to make a statement here before, giving an example, if you have one, is like, we always want to talk about the wins. We always want to talk about the success, but we don't want to talk about what it took to get there, all the losses. So that thought came to mind, but do you have any examples?
So, the examples I have are from other people. I think I may be jumping ahead to our biblical examples here. But some of the biblical examples we have is Jonah. He's the one that comes to mind here. So in this situation, he was more being influenced by God's leadership. And he was fighting it and struggling and sacrificing and losing all along the way. But God's will ended up winning in the end. But it was the struggle that made him want to do what it was that he did. So I can carry on with the biblical examples unless there's something else you want to throw in there first.
An example I had for biblical ones was leadership denying God's plan. Some examples of that. Sometimes it's not always that you did the right thing. It's finding out you did the wrong thing. And some of those that I thought of was Saul not submitting to the Lord by accepting David as the next king, and we can see throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel, throughout the passages of him struggling with that and trying to hunt down David. One of the examples I had was 1 Samuel 18:7-9, where it says, the women sang as they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And it says right after that, then Saul became very angry, for this saying displeased him. And he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, but to me they have ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day on.
Yeah, that's kind of rough.
Yeah.
That's rough. You feel for each side of that party.
Yeah.
The fact that Saul wasn't able to handle that, and he wanted to deny God's plan. He wanted to change it and make, not God's will, but my will. It's what I want.
Yeah.
And gives you an example and makes you wonder of how many people do that kind of thing. But of course, for every Saul and David, we also have examples of successful leadership of following in God's plan. You've got a Joshua for every Moses, right? Elisha and Elijah. I'm going to be mentioning them in my sermon tomorrow morning. But the learning from one another and being influenced in that positive direction. And like you said, we hear about a lot of these victories, but for each of these people I mentioned, you go to the New Testament, and you've got Paul and Timothy, but all the struggles and all the losses that they went through, and they sacrificed, and they were persecuted, and everything like that, makes for an amazing leadership story.
Yeah.
But they were still able to keep their influence, and I guess because of their character. Their character and the character of God. They kept pointing it away from themselves. They weren't prideful leaders. They were humble.
Yeah. One more example of a failure of like a success story of it that you're talking about, of turning back to God and doing what is right, is Peter. Peter stepping over Jesus's lead by cutting the ear of a high priest's servant. And Jesus at the end of John 18:10-11 saying, "Put the sword into the sheath, the cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it?" Peter needed to accept the loss of his will, the will of wanting to save Jesus, his teacher, his Messiah, the one he was following, and he had to lose his will and follow Jesus. And I think sometimes we have to, we're not cutting off people's ears, but we're sometimes cutting in the way of Jesus, of where he wants us to go, and doing our own thing. And we have to learn hard lessons of loss, of, no, we weren't supposed to go that direction.
That's exactly right. I'm glad that we don't have to get our ear cut off to understand these losses. We'd all be Vincent Van Gogh around here, right? Yeah. Absolutely.
So we have short term, and sometimes we lose long term position, and sometimes when we do that, when we go through such events, we lose that long term position. We wonder what we did wrong. Sometimes we can be confident that we did everything right, and this can take a form of rejection in a relationship. It doesn't have to be in a marriage, or a girlfriend boyfriend type of marriage, couples. It can be a rejection in friendship. It can be a rejection of a relationship of just someone that's an acquaintance. And it can also include being demoted or fired. Maybe that's happened to someone listening. Maybe it was without reasonable cause. You sat and counted all the great things you did, and for some reason they fired you, or they demoted you. Another is that, the influence we thought we had with people really wasn't there. We didn't have the influence that, there's some humility that happens. And when I've experienced this type of situation, I reflect on how I got to that point, and to a fault, admittedly. And with that fault, I've had to learn to pray about it and ask God what my next steps are. And sometimes it's not leadership. Sometimes it's a washer breaking that hits you, but realizing, okay, I just need to pray and talk to God, ask him, why did it, please, show me how I got to this point. Please show me the path you want me to take. And sometimes it's a waiting period where you're not doing anything. And then, God gives way to opportunity to serve him, or whatever, he wants you to do. And so we have to focus on God and what he has in store for us, and what he is preparing for us next. And every time I go through things like this of a long-term loss, I have to remember, and admittedly have to be reminded sometimes, because I forget that he's got something greater. Who knows what it is? I don't know what it is, in those moments, right that moment, but that God has something greater in store. And that is, for long-term loss, I have to remember that.
That's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Exactly right. I think it's important for balance. I remember hearing this a long time ago. It's important to find a victory in every defeat and a defeat in every victory. I think that kind of helps you to stay balanced, to not go too far full of yourself, but also at the same time to not beat yourself up too much either. When you do have a loss or a defeat, okay, what's the victory in this? What can I learn from this? How can I get better for it for next time? But then when you just had a great victory, it's important that you're not reading your own press clippings and patting yourself on the back and telling your God how great you are. Tell your problems how great your God is, you know? But it's so important to be able to do that. And that, I think it's how we react and how we respond to these victories and defeats in our lives that help us to kind of bounce back, right? To not have a pity party for too long, because it's hard because then where are you leading somebody, right? If we're always influencing and always leading, we need to keep ourselves balanced and to continue to go forward. With long term, there's a book called, the term is grit. The author's name is Duckworth, and she wrote about grit. Essentially, that is what long term keeps the leader focused on their vision and keeps their influence and people following them, that they're willing to just push through this no matter what else has happened. And when they are down, to quickly get themselves back up and say, you know what, I'm going to finish this because I told God I was going to.
I think that gives a introduction to this next part, subtopic, is when we fail and people are following us, maybe it's a sin, maybe it's whatever your situation is, of like, wow, I lost confidence in my family and how I lead. I've lost confidence in the workplace, and now I'm being monitored. They want proof of my work. Or it's in church that, maybe it's not even in church, but you're taking a walk and your conduct wasn't what people expected, or your reaction wasn't what people expected, and that can have an effect. And so restoring that confidence and, being an example of reacting to loss rather than being an example of sulking in defeat. There's some, being that example and learning how to do that. For myself, it's like a process that I've not the U process, but some things that I've learned to work through such things of losing confidence, people losing confidence in how you lead. First, it's humility. Sometimes people bring things to your attention that you don't want to hear about because it's something that they're saying they see in you, and maybe you didn't mean it that way. Maybe like for me, I have a monotone voice, and I'm also not a morning person. So you put that all together, and you're not a great introduction of a person when you come into work, and being aware of that. But then when people actually bring it up and say, hey, Brendan, work on this, because like we hope you don't mean about anything by it. And so first step is humility. Just take a step back and say, I know I don't mean anything by it, but that's the way that they're taking it, and so I have to see their side and work at that. And then I think that goes into reflection, and I just kind of already touched on that, of reflecting on what they said. And it's not about letting it eat at you, because I can do that. I can lose sleep, but it's reflecting on it and saying, what truth is God trying to show me in it? And then next step being, learning. And learning isn't just you learning a hard lesson and trying to figure it out on your own. Trying to find other people that you can, shoot this issue to, and you have this relationship with them that they can give you sound advice to know what to do. I've been through hard things in life where there were choices that I made that I wouldn't have been in it if I listened to the wisdom that was given to me. And I was hard-headed. And so I didn't want to learn. I wanted to seek counsel, but I didn't want to listen to it. And so you got to learn. Learning is also listening, not just seeking it, but taking it in. And the next, after that's training, using what you learn. We talk about leadership. We read books about leadership. and people, this podcast, somebody's listening to this about, better leadership through losses. And maybe you'll take this and say, hey, that's great advice. But when you go out and maybe you're facing a really hard situation at work, maybe that's the toughest thing on your mind, and you go and try to apply it. I don't think that that's the most helpful way. I think the most helpful way is, how can I use what I learned when it's easiest to grow confident to use it where the real difficulties begin? Where's the easiest place I can apply this? Maybe it's my dog going on a walk and I'm really tired of my dog's pulling me. And so instead of getting mad, I'm sure there's some fluctuation there to know that I do get aggravated. But taking a deep breath, saying, okay, let's try to turn this around and turn it into a training session. Let's just do a quick about turn and do it again until dogs realize I have to follow. And that's not, addressing conflict with a person, but the small things and how we address things in life can help us become a better person in how we deal with the bigger things in life. And then it's time for application. That, okay, it's time to apply it to the big stuff. It's time to grow up. Maybe it's time to eat crow. One pastor used to tell me, Brennan, I think you just have to eat crow. And, applying it of what we've learned through people.
That's right. Yeah. Keeping the long-term vision in mind of, okay, what do I ultimately want to get out of this, and not get distracted or tripped up on a lot of the little things, to turn your eyes on Jesus, so to speak, to keep that in mind and not let anything else bother you. I just heard something else this morning on an Iron Sharpens Iron Zoom call that I'm a part of, talking about Nehemiah and him building this wall around Jerusalem, and people were distracting him, and they had to have guards to keep people from attacking them. And his line was something along the lines of, I can't come down right now, I'm doing important things. To be able to focus on that, but also to be able to see things through other people's eyes and to relate to them and show them how they can be a part of something else bigger than them. I'm going to tell you now the quote of Dwight Eisenhower, his leadership quote here. Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. That's kind of a tongue twister a little bit, and to think about it, but that's ultimately how we get the big picture goal through other people, through our influence of what God puts in our lives and who God put us in their lives.
And the thing that keeps coming up in my mind is sometimes, because you talked about the bus, sometimes we're the bus driver, and sometimes we have to lose that position, and sometimes we're in the back seat, all the way in the back. And I think that requires that process I talked about, to really say it's about the big picture of furthering the kingdom of God, whether it's in our job or wherever we're at. It's not just church, that we're furthering the kingdom, and saying, okay, maybe I'm not the one to take in charge this time or long term.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I feel like the flat tire on the bus, or that, but the spare tire is probably one of the most important parts of that bus too. So no matter what part somebody's playing, it's all of us put together that can accomplish something great.
All right. So I think we'll end it there. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to the next podcast.